She thought this trip might stitch their family back together, but when her own son told the hotel, "She'll sleep in the car," something inside her unraveled. What was supposed to be a reunion became a reckoning. In the silence of a presidential suite, meant for someone else, she found a voice that had been buried beneath decades of obedience. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't just for herself. It was for every woman who was told survival meant silence. The hotel lobby looked like a museum exhibit for people who didn't need to touch their own luggage. A vaulted ceiling held a chandelier the size of a small planet, and the check-in desk shimmered inlaid gold beneath ambient lighting, meant to imply calm, like anyone stepping in here had just left a wellness retreat instead of a minivan with a broken AC vent and a 20-year-old son who hadn't looked up from his phone in 2 hours. I stood behind them, Harlan and Asher, one hand loosely gripping the handle of my carry-on, the other pressed against my ribcage like I could keep my own spine from wilting. Harlan was already charming the concierge, his voice dipped in the politeness he used to weaponize at dinner parties. He'd always been good at manners, especially the kind that excluded. "This is for the Donovan reservation," he said, resting a platinum credit card between 2 fingers like a magician preparing a trick. "2 rooms, double suite with a mountain view." The woman behind the desk, all high cheekbones and corporate pleasantness, clicked her keyboard and smiled back. "Welcome to the Cascade Ridge, Mr. Donovan. You're in the Elk River suite, one of our best." Asher leaned one elbow on the counter. "And it better be," he muttered, voice casual, rehearsed. "We've been in the car with her for 5 hours." I blinked but said nothing. The woman looked past me, clearly waiting for the full party to step forward. Her smile faltered slightly when no one introduced me. I stepped up beside them. Before I could open my mouth, Asher beat me to it. "She'll sleep in the car." The words didn't land like a joke. He didn't smirk. He didn't glance sideways to gauge my reaction. He just said it and turned away, scrolling on his phone as if my place in this equation was already settled. And it wasn't indoors. The concierge hesitated. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. I felt the world tilt, not violently, just slightly, like a camera lens shifting out of focus. My throat tightened, but not from the heat of anger or the sting of shame. It was the familiar constriction of knowing there would be no defense, that speaking up would make it worse. That silence, at least, would be clean. So I did what I've always done when the room seemed to decide I was extra. I smiled. A flat, fragile thing. I waved a dismissive hand, as if I had made the joke. "Don't mind him," I said. "It's been a long trip." Harlan didn't look at me. He was already reaching for his keycards. "Claire, why don't you take a walk? Clear your head or something. We'll meet you later for dinner." A walk, like I was a dog left outside. The woman behind the counter glanced at me, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She opened her mouth, but I turned before she could say anything. The marble floor echoed beneath my shoes. The chandeliers cast strange halos on the polished stone, refracting the overhead light into 100 cold reflections. I didn't look back. Outside, the air was thin, high altitude, dry and sharp with the scent of pine. I walked the gravel path that led away from the valet stand, past a manicured row of flower beds, and toward the overlook where the ridge dropped into a basin of deep green valley. A family stood at the rail, mother, father, 2 children huddled for a photo. The father kissed the mother's cheek just before the shutter clicked. She smiled like it startled her. I stood behind them until they left. Then I leaned on the rail and stared. It was beautiful, and I felt nothing. Not awe, not peace, just the absence of noise, of decision. I'd stopped being a participant on this trip before it started. I was a tag-along, a character in the margins, the mother included for optics. I should have said something. I knew that. I should have spoken when Asher humiliated me in front of strangers, when Harlan failed to correct him, when I was offered exile under the guise of a walk. But I didn't, because that's not how I was trained. And make no mistake, I was trained to take up less space, to laugh when it hurt, to say I'm fine when it felt like the room was closing in, to be proud of my family, even when they acted like I was some burdensome footnote. I sat on a wooden bench just off the path, nestled beneath a spruce that leaned slightly toward the valley. Its shadow fell across my lap like a shawl. I stared down at my hands. My knuckles looked older now, not in a sad way, just in a way that proved I'd held things too long. Bags, grudges, expectations. I don't know how long I sat there before someone cleared their throat. "Ma'am?" It was the concierge. The same woman from earlier. She stood with her hands politely clasped, expression softened. I just wanted to say, there's a mix-up on the reservation," she said carefully. "Turns out we have an extra room. We'd be happy to offer you an upgrade at no charge, if you're interested." I looked at her. The way she said it, it wasn't pity. It was offering. "What kind of upgrade?" She smiled just a little. "Presidential suite." I blinked, laughed under my breath. "Isn't that a bit much?" "Maybe," she said. "But sometimes, so is everything else." I didn't ask how or why. I didn't look for Harlan or Asher. I just stood, smoothed the front of my shirt, and followed her back to the lobby. As we walked through the main doors, the chandelier light didn't seem quite so cold. The woman led me to a private elevator with brass doors and no floor buttons, just a keycard slot. When we reached the top floor, she opened the door and stepped aside. It was massive. Windows on 3 sides, overlooking forests, cliffs, sky. A grand piano stood silent in one corner. A fireplace flickered softly in another. The furniture was elegant, but not sterile. Warm wood, deep leather, pale carpets that looked like they remembered bare feet. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. I looked around, took in the sheer absurdity of it. And then, without meaning to, I laughed. Quiet at first, then louder, not bitter, not wild, just disbelieving. I walked to the center of the room and let my fingers trail along the back of the leather sofa. Then I sat down. It felt like I belonged. Not in the suite, not in the luxury, but in a space where no one got to decide I was disposable. And for the first time that day, I breathed. The door clicked softly behind me, sealing out the hallway and the echoes of the check-in desk. I stood motionless, palms damp against the handle of my small suitcase, afraid that breathing too deeply might signal the hotel's mistake. That someone would realize I wasn't supposed to be here, that I'd be escorted out, gently and politely, like an imposter in a dress too plain for the velvet rug beneath my feet. The presidential suite didn't try to impress. It just existed, fully confident in its quiet power. Mahogany panels, muted lighting, a fireplace of gray slate burning low and steady. The air carried a trace of bergamot and clean linen. No chill, no echo, just calm. I walked slowly through the space, as if it might disappear behind me. A tray of bottled water rested on a marble table. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the curve of the mountains, their edges fading into mist. Across from the fireplace sat a wide leather chaise, positioned just so, as though waiting for someone to collapse and confess. It was beautiful. It was too much, and none of it felt like it belonged to me. I perched at the edge of the chaise, coat still on, my suitcase upright beside me like a chaperone. The silence inside the room felt heavier than the silence outside of it. Outside, I had been dismissed with words, "She'll sleep in the car." Inside, I'd been dismissed with kindness. Reed Callahan hadn't pitied me, not exactly, but the upgrade was intentional, gentle. And something about his tone, equal parts discretion and defiance, suggested he saw more than he said, or at least that he'd seen women like me before. Still, kindness without familiarity always made me suspicious. It often preceded a bill, or a favor owed. I stood and walked to the tall wardrobe mirror across from the sitting area. It was built into the wall, tasteful, understated, but impossible to ignore once you faced it fully. The woman in the glass was tired, not disheveled, not hysterical, just tired. The lines around her mouth had deepened. Her eyes looked smaller, not from age, but from years of watching what she said. Her shoulders carried the permanent slope of someone who'd been told she was too much or not enough so many times, she learned to simply shrink. I reached up to smooth my hair, then dropped my hand halfway. I didn't recognize myself, not as I had been, not as I wanted to be. This was someone in between, half erased. A knock startled me. I turned too quickly, heart thudding. It was Reed again, standing just outside with a tray. "I brought something from the kitchen, no charge," he said. "Figured you might need something warm." I opened the door just enough for the tray to pass through. A bowl of butternut squash soup, a heel of warm sourdough, a cloth napkin folded like origami. I didn't know what to say. Reed smiled faintly. Don't worry. Happens more than you'd think. Some reservations just need adjusting. He paused. Enjoy your stay, Ms. Donovan. He left without waiting for a reply. I closed the door and locked it behind me. That lock felt like the first choice I'd made all day. I ate slowly, cross-legged on the chaise. No phone, no TV. Just the quiet sound of soup being stirred, the occasional crack from the fire, and the faint memory of Harlan's voice in my head. Don't make things awkward. Just smile. Flashback. Harlan, 3 years ago, at a colleague's dinner party in Boston. I'd made a comment, light, forgettable, about a book that challenged corporate structures. Harlan cut in with a chuckle. Claire gets her facts from opinion pieces. Laughter. Polite. Dismissive. He topped off his wine and leaned back as if the whole thing was charming. I nodded along, biting my cheek to keep from answering. My role had always been that of the agreeable echo. Another flash. Asher, at 17, walking out of the room mid-conversation. I asked if he wanted to help with dinner. He didn't even pause, just said, "Ask Dad." He's the one who knows how to cook a steak. He didn't mean to be cruel, but he didn't care if it hurt. He'd learned early that I was safe to ignore. I leaned back into the cushions, exhaling too hard. It wasn't just a long day. It was years of practiced restraint now begging for release. I stood and walked to the desk. Dark wood. Simple. The kind of furniture no one expected to actually use. A notepad sat on top, blank. I opened the drawer beneath it, expecting a pen. Instead, I found a notebook. Not hotel stationery, a worn spiral-bound thing with a blue cover, corners dog-eared, the edge of a bookstore barcode still stuck to the back. I turned it over in my hands, confused. A name was scribbled on the first page. L. Monroe. I hesitated. Then flipped to the next page. Day 4. He hasn't called. But I know if I answer first, he'll just twist it. So I'm staying quiet. He says silence is manipulative. But what's talking ever gotten me? I flipped again. Day 7. I left the door locked all night. Not because I'm afraid, because I want to choose something. Anything. Even if it's just where I sleep. The handwriting was hurried, sometimes slanted, but always raw. Pain so thick it bled through the ink. I turned another page. Day 10. This room doesn't feel like mine, but it doesn't feel like his either. Maybe that's enough for now. I closed the notebook carefully. It felt sacred, forgotten, but not lost. Elle Monroe hadn't been trying to be found, but she hadn't hidden it well either. Maybe part of her wanted someone to read her words, to witness the undoing, or maybe to believe she still existed outside of his rules. I rested the notebook gently in the center of the desk and stepped back. The room had changed, not physically, but now it carried a history, a second ghost. A woman who had once stood at this same mirror in this same space, wondering who she was becoming. I looked back at my reflection, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not just exhaustion, but defiance. Small, quiet, but real. This wasn't my home. It wasn't my triumph. It wasn't even my plan. But it was, at last, a room that didn't belong to Harlan. And that had to mean something. I didn't know when I started believing that being needed was the same thing as being loved. But at some point, it became my currency, my offering. If I couldn't be admired, I could at least be useful. Quietly, efficiently, without expectation of thanks. And when usefulness wasn't enough, I leaned on endurance. Because there's a kind of pride in not falling apart, in withstanding dismissiveness like a steady wall that knows it won't be thanked for holding up the roof. The suite was dark now, save for the fire, which crackled low in the grate like it knew not to interrupt my thoughts. I sat at the desk with the forgotten notebook open in front of me. Elle Monroe's words paused mid-thought, a pen in my hand. The kind hotels keep in drawers, stamped with the brand logo like a whisper of corporate approval. I hadn't written anything personal in years. Grocery lists, appointment notes, phone messages, that was it. I'd let my words dry up slowly until even my own inner voice stopped asking questions. But now I needed to see it, in ink, with weight. I turned to the next blank page. Day 1. I'm not sure if I'm writing this to remember or to stop pretending I forgot. The words came stiffly at first. Each letter, a negotiation between who I'd been and who I wasn't ready to become. But they came. I wrote until my hand cramped. And as the lines filled, so did the memories. Not loud ones, the soft ones. The slow erosion of a self. Summer, 2009. Asher was 5. We were supposed to go to Florida. Beach trip. Harlan had even rented the house. But a week before, Harlan said I'd probably prefer to stay home. "You hate the heat," he said. "You'll complain the whole time. Let me take Asher, make it a father-son thing." I didn't complain. I packed their bags. I stayed behind and cleaned the baseboards. Later, when people asked why I hadn't gone, I laughed and said, "Oh, you know me. Sand in my shoes drives me crazy." They came back tanned and tired, full of stories. I smiled and listened, and that was that. Thanksgiving, 2012. I made pumpkin pie from scratch, took 3 tries. I used my mother's recipe, even though Harlan always said it was too heavy. At dinner, I brought it out, proud. Harlan took 1 bite and said, "It's rich." "You didn't adjust the cloves?" Asher laughed. "Classic mom," he said. "Always extra." The room chuckled. I cleared the plates. There were other moments, small ones, meant to be forgotten. But they clung to me like lint, unnoticeable until I stepped into the right light. Each instance layered itself on my spine, adding weight I didn't recognize as burden until my posture changed. That was how it worked. Not in catastrophe, in erosion, in being labeled emotional when I cried and ungrateful when I didn't. In being told you're lucky, he provides whenever I ask for something that didn't come in a box. In becoming the joke everyone laughed at because it was safer than being the woman who asked them to look closer. And Asher, he learned it all. Not from lectures, but from silence. He watched Harlan interrupt me mid-sentence without flinching. He heard me apologize for things I didn't do. He saw me fold napkins with perfect creases while Harlan handled the hard stuff. I taught him, without meaning to, that women clean up quiet messes while men make the big decisions. I thought I was shielding him from conflict. What I was really doing was teaching him how to ignore me without guilt. He didn't have to raise his voice to make me invisible. He just had to inherit the tone. And he did. He inherited it so cleanly, so completely, that I mistook it for his own voice. But it wasn't. It was Harlan's echo. And I'd spent years amplifying it by staying silent. I closed the notebook halfway and stared at the pen in my hand. It looked too smooth to carry anything sharp. But the truth was, I'd used pens like this to sign every paper that slowly erased me. The school forms where I signed mother, but never attended a single parent-teacher conference because Harlan handled those. The medical forms where I checked the box next to emergency contact, spouse, and left my own name blank. The check stubs I filled out for groceries that were always too expensive, even when I only bought off-brand. I gave up my voice one small signature at a time, and no one stole it from me. I surrendered it, because I thought that was what love looked like, because I thought self-sacrifice was virtue, because I thought needing less made me more worthy. But endurance isn't the same thing as strength. And being ignored isn't the same thing as being loved. It's just quieter, easier to disguise, harder to defend. I opened the notebook again and kept writing. I spent years calling survival grace, but grace doesn't require erasure. I thought staying quiet made me a good mother, but my silence didn't protect Asher. It trained him. And now he thinks telling the hotel clerk I'll sleep in the car is just efficiency. He doesn't see the cruelty. Because I made it look normal. The pen scratched lightly against the page. I paused, blinked, rubbed my hand. The fire behind me hissed gently, like it agreed. I turned the page and began again. I want to remember what it felt like to matter. Not to someone else. To me. I want to remember who I was before being useful became my only role. It wasn't poetry, but it was honest. And after all this time, that felt like enough. The sunlight in the suite arrived like an apology. It spilled through the thick velvet curtains in soft slants, kissing the cream carpet and catching the corners of the crystal water glasses on the bar cart. A gentle amber glow wrapped the space in something warmer than the fireplace ever had. I sat on the small dining set beside the window, 2 chairs but only one occupied. A silver dome-covered tray rested in front of me, condensation fogging the glass of fresh orange juice. A carafe of coffee released a slow curl of steam, and beneath the dome waited two warm croissants, one buttered, one not, alongside scrambled eggs and a folded cloth napkin arranged with the precision of someone who believed in quiet rituals. Classical music played low from a speaker somewhere in the ceiling, something with strings and piano, gentle and non-invasive. It didn't fill the silence. It partnered with it. I peeled the croissant apart slowly, watching flakes scatter to the plate. The taste was rich but soft, butter melting into the creases. I ate alone. I ate slowly. I ate without speaking, asking, answering, or preparing anything for anyone else. It was the first meal I could remember where I wasn't trying to perform love with food. Not since Asher was small. Summer, years ago. We were at a beachside resort in South Carolina. I'd spent the morning packing coolers, smearing sunblock onto squirming shoulders, laying out towels, organizing snacks into individual bags. Harlan and Asher were already down by the water when I arrived, sweaty, arms full of gear. I dropped everything and asked if anyone wanted something to drink. Harlan nodded, eyes still on his phone. Asher didn't look up. They never noticed I hadn't eaten. I didn't either. Another year, Vermont, during leaf season, I got up early to make pancakes. No one came down. I let them get cold. When Harlan finally wandered in, he said, "You didn't need to cook. There's a breakfast buffet downstairs." He wasn't unkind, just uninterested. I had spent decades showing love through preparation, attention, service, and in return, I'd become background. Necessary, but invisible. But here, this tray had been made for me, arranged for one, no children to cut food for, no husband to correct me mid-story, no one to manage but myself. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt real. I had just poured my second cup of coffee when the door opened with a light knock and the shuffle of feet. Housekeeping. I turned, startled, and saw a woman step in, older, maybe mid-60s, with silver streaks pulled into a bun. She wore the hotel uniform, but moved like someone who'd stopped being intimidated by wealth decades ago. "Sorry," she said gently. "Didn't mean to intrude. Just need to check the minibar restock." She moved with a quiet grace, navigating the room as if it belonged to her, too. "I'm Claire," I said, offering the smallest smile. She looked up. "Grace. Fitting, huh?" she said, eyes twinkling. "You okay in here, Miss Claire?" It caught me off guard. The question wasn't routine. It was laced with something softer. "Yes," I said, then corrected. "I think so." Grace nodded. She moved to the minibar and scanned it briefly, then stood upright, brushing her apron flat. "Most women I've seen up here," she paused, "they're either celebrating or escaping." I didn't reply. She smiled. "I can always tell the difference." I swallowed, unsure how much of me was visible. "Which do I look like?" Grace tilted her head. "Little of both, maybe. That's a good start." I smiled, this time for real. She walked to the door, then paused. "There's nothing wrong with quiet," she said, "unless it's the kind that hides you." And then she was gone. I finished my breakfast in silence, but now it was laced with something new. Reflection, maybe? Not regret? Not yet. The last sip of coffee was cold when I stood and walked to the window. The view stretched wide, trees, slope, distant road. Below, just beneath my line of sight, I heard voices. Two men. Familiar tones. Low enough to feel private, loud enough to carry through the cracked open window. "I mean, come on. Presidential suite?" It was Asher. "She's always been a drama magnet," Harlan replied. "Letting her play the martyr keeps her from interfering." I froze. Asher laughed, quick and sharp. "She probably thinks this is her redemption arc. What's next? Yoga on the balcony?" "Don't joke," Harlan said. "If she starts journaling, we'll never hear the end of it." Another laugh. I stepped back from the window. The room spun slightly. Not from shock, but from a strange clarity. The kind that burns more than it soothes. I wasn't surprised, not really. They'd always done this. Side conversations, private edits of my character. The only difference now was that I wasn't sitting at the table smiling through it. I was here, above it, listening, noticing. It cracked something open in me, not a wound, but a recognition. They didn't just ignore me, they rewrote me. Made me the villain in a story I hadn't even known was being told. And I'd allowed it. In my silence, in my servitude, in my desperate hope that staying useful would keep me beloved. It hadn't. And now, eating breakfast alone in a room I wasn't supposed to have, I finally felt what their laughter refused to admit. I had already left them, and they hadn't even noticed. The mirror didn't lie, but it had learned not to scream. I stood before it in the hotel robe, the plush white belt tied too tight at my waist, sleeves brushing my knuckles like the past trying to stay close. The woman staring back wasn't new. She was just unmasked. No more breakfast tray to serve, no dinner prep in her future. Her hands were idle, but her mind wasn't. The robe slid to the floor in a soundless collapse. I stepped away from it, not because it didn't feel soft, but because it wasn't mine. It was something offered in comfort, but still borrowed, like every role I'd ever accepted without question. Housekeeper, peacemaker, passive backbone, roles designed by someone else and accepted by someone like me. I walked to the closet where I'd hung the one outfit I packed, just in case. Black slacks. A blouse with a pattern bold enough to make me nervous when I first bought it years ago. Still had the tag, still unworn. I slipped into it now, button by button. Not because I had anywhere to go, but because I didn't want to disappear anymore. When I stepped back to the mirror, the image that looked back wasn't glamorous. But it was chosen. For the first time in years, I had dressed for myself. A knock pulled me from my thoughts. I opened the door to find Grace standing with a small cleaning cart. "Didn't want to intrude," she said gently, "but thought I'd check." "You're fine," I said, stepping aside. Grace didn't glance around like most people do. She moved straight to the trash bin, adjusted a towel. No performance, no pretend curiosity. "I wanted to thank you," I said after a moment, "for yesterday." Grace looked up. "Sometimes saying nothing speaks louder," I nodded. "But sometimes, I don't know if I was quiet or just erased." Grace leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You ever notice how people thank quiet women for being so easy?" I blinked. "They don't say strong. They say easy to be around. Like our silence is a service, like being overlooked is a talent." I felt something flicker in my chest. "I thought it made me a good wife," I said. "A good mother." Grace nodded slowly. "That's what they want you to think, because if you question it, you're being difficult." She reached into the cart and handed me a folded slip of paper. "I wrote this down a long time ago, when I first walked out on someone who made me feel invisible." I opened it. 7 words, scribbled in soft pencil. "What you tolerate teaches others how to treat you." I looked up. Grace's eyes met mine. "I used to think staying was strength," I whispered. "It's not," she said. "Endurance is only noble if you choose it freely." A pause. "And did you?" "No," I said. "Not once." Grace smiled, not with pity, but something close to recognition. "Well," she said, stepping toward the door, "it's never too late to renegotiate the contract." I sat down at the desk once she left. The notebook still lay open where I had left it. L. Monroe's words marking one side, my own the other. I flipped to a fresh page. Today, I questioned the agreements I never signed. I wrote in long, slanted script. No outline, no plan, just truths I'd kept folded in the corners of my heart. I was obedient, but not respected. I was quiet, but never heard. I was helpful, but never asked what I needed. I tapped the pen once against the desk, then wrote, "I want to unlearn the habits that shrank me." It didn't feel like a declaration. It felt like a dare. But still, I kept writing, line by line. An inventory of the promises I'd made to others at the expense of myself. Smile even when it hurts. Don't take up space. Love without asking for love in return. And then, beneath those, I started a new list. A new version of me would speak when she's interrupted. Say no without apology. Stop making herself easier for others to digest. I paused, reread the sentence, underlined it. The light shifted on the floor as clouds moved past the sun. My reflection in the window glass looked softer now, not smaller, just not afraid of being seen. I picked up the pen again. Maybe I've been quiet too long to roar, but I can still learn how to stand. By mid-morning, the suite no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt like air I'd finally earned the right to breathe. The velvet curtains were flung open, letting the cold mountain air pour through the slightly cracked windows. crisp enough to sting my skin awake. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It pulsed like music you could only hear if you stopped pretending to be someone else. I had created a playlist, a strange collection of songs I hadn't let myself listen to in years. Gravel voice ballads, indie folk, a couple of old classics from my college years, songs I'd once danced to in the kitchen before I started tiptoeing around everyone else's moods. I played them now, soft but steady. It was the first time in years I'd let sound reflect me instead of them. The fireplace flickered behind me, echoing the rhythm. I'd made tea, not the kind I bought out of habit, but the kind I always passed over in the grocery store because Harlan called it flowery, hibiscus and lemongrass. It filled the room with a scent that didn't beg approval. It just was. The notebook lay open again, spine creased. I sat beside it with the familiarity of someone returning to a half-healed conversation. Each entry from El Monroe was a soft echo of something I hadn't had words for. Day 11. I keep thinking about the sound the door made when I shut it behind me. It didn't slam. It sighed, like it wanted to let me go. Day 13. I'm not sure I ever loved him. I think I just feared the space he left behind. Day 15. If no one ever sees me clearly, does that mean I'm safe or invisible? Her words weren't dramatic. They didn't scream. They dripped, quiet and persistent, like water through stone. Each one chipped away at the shape of something I'd mistaken for love. I added my own on the next page. Day 2. The suite is warm, but it's not the heat that comforts me. It's the permission to be still. Day 2. I'm not dressing for anyone's gaze today, not even my own. Day 2. Maybe I never stopped being a woman. I just stopped being allowed to feel like one. I stared at that last sentence a long time. The music in the background shifted. The air blew in harder through the window. I didn't close it. There was a knock. When I opened the door, Reed stood there, not with a tray or towels or an apology for intruding, just his hands in his coat pockets and a quiet presence, like he had a reason to be here that hadn't been formed into words yet. I was passing by, he said, and thought I'd check in. Room looks different. I stepped aside, letting him look. His gaze swept the room, the music, the tea, the open windows, the faint color in my cheeks that hadn't been there yesterday. He smiled almost shyly. You planning to check out? Or finally check in? I laughed softly. Bit of both, maybe. He nodded, leaned lightly against the doorframe. I'm glad. There was a pause. Something in his eyes flickered, not hesitation exactly, something more tender, measured. I recognized the notebook, he said finally. I stilled. You did? He nodded slowly. It was my mother's. The silence between us stretched, not uncomfortable, just wide enough to carry the weight of what he'd said. She stayed here, he continued, almost 5 years ago. Booked the suite herself, didn't tell anyone, just vanished from our lives for a week. When she came back, she left my father. Didn't give a speech, didn't ask for permission. She just moved forward. I swallowed, unsure what to say. She was the quiet type, he added. Didn't yell, didn't explain, just did what she needed to do. Is she okay? Reed hesitated, then looked down. She died 6 months after she left. Cancer, it was already late. But those few months. He looked up again. They were hers. I sat down slowly, the room tilting just slightly under the weight of his story. She never mentioned the notebook, he said. I didn't know it existed until I came to work here. Found it during one of my first days as concierge, recognized her handwriting. I almost took it home, but something stopped me. He looked at me fully now. I think she wanted someone like you to find it. I didn't have a reply, just the slow rise of breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She used to say, he added, that a room can be more than a space. It can be a shift, a sanctuary if you let it. I looked around, and for the first time I believed it.
The restaurant shimmered with low lighting and polished surfaces, brass sconces casting golden shadows, white linens folded like origami across each table. The kind of place that whispered formality but screamed money. I stood near the entrance, coat unbuttoned, hands clenched inside my sleeves. I hadn't made a reservation. I hadn't even planned to come. I just wanted to see. From where I stood, I could see them. Table 12, near the window, Harlan and Asher, same posture, same cut of jacket, forks held in identical grips. Asher tilted his head as he spoke, Harlan nodded, and both laughed, shoulders forward, chin slightly raised, eyes sharp. They looked like colleagues at a power lunch, not father and son. They hadn't noticed me. Of course they hadn't. I stepped farther into the room, careful to stay behind a column near the host's stand. Not hiding, just observing. It was a skill I'd honed over decades. I used to think it made me a good mother. I now realized it made me invisible. Their conversation wasn't audible, but the dynamic was clear. Two men circling the same idea, correcting each other with smiles too thin to trust. Harlan leaned in with a finger on the rim of his wine glass. Asher countered with a shrug and an eyebrow raise. Back and forth, competitive, calculated, not violent, but not warm either. I realized something then. I'd always assumed I was their glue, the person who smoothed the edges, softened the sharp parts, mediated their fights with gentle hands and softer words. But that wasn't it. I was the buffer, the emotional shock absorber, the one who diffused the tension they built when left alone too long. And now, watching them from 10 feet away, I saw it clearly. Without me, they weren't better. They were just louder. I thought of all the dinners I'd planned around their moods. The roast cooked medium rare for Harlan. The mac and cheese left untainted for Asher. I used to worry that without my careful curation, they wouldn't get along. But now I saw the truth. They didn't need peace. They needed a third party to pour it for them. I turned toward the door, slipping back into my coat sleeve. No one stopped me. No one looked up. I walked out without a word, the door closing behind me like punctuation, and it stung more than a speech ever could have. Flashback. The house on Windsor Street. We'd just moved in. Asher was 4. He refused to brush his teeth that night. Full meltdown. Tiny fists. Red face. Tears. I knelt beside him, toothbrush in hand, trying to reason. "Just 3 seconds, buddy, then you can pick the story," he wailed. Harlan stood at the doorway, arms folded. "You're negotiating again," he said flatly. I looked up. He's tired. I'm trying not to escalate. He's learning that whining gets him options. You're teaching weakness. I flinched. He's 4. And you're coddling. He stepped in, took the toothbrush from my hand, grabbed Asher's arm, not roughly but firmly. "Open," he commanded. Asher froze. The brushing happened in silence, fast, mechanical. Afterward, Harlan handed the brush back to me. "Discipline doesn't need warmth," he said. "It needs clarity." I never tried to negotiate again. Outside the restaurant, the night air was sharp enough to wake me fully. I stood near a heat lamp, watching my breath rise in faint clouds. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply let it settle. They didn't need me at that table, but maybe, for the first time, I didn't need to be there either.
I didn't hear the knock, just the door clicking open, slow and deliberate. "Asher," I said, already knowing it was him. He didn't sit, just stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his face sharper than it had been that morning. Tighter jaw, eyes darkened. "Why are you making this trip about you?" The question landed without pretense, no grace, no anger even, just entitlement. Like he had rehearsed it. Like the trip, the room, even my breath had stepped outside of its proper role. I didn't flinch. "Because I was never allowed to make anything about me." He blinked once, but said nothing. I stood slowly from the desk, the notebook still open behind me. His eyes flicked toward it, then back to mine. "I thought this was a family thing," he said. I nodded. So did I. Silence stretched like glass between us, thin, rigid, waiting to crack. "Dad says you're spinning a narrative," he added, voice cooler now. "Trying to make this into some self-actualization experiment." I walked to the window but didn't turn. The mountains looked softer in the afternoon haze. "Do you remember the trip to Charleston when you were 9? I asked. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You forgot your shoes at the beach," I continued. "And I carried you back to the car, barefoot, across broken shells." He didn't reply. "You never said thank you," I added. "And I told myself that was fine. That's what mothers do. They absorb." He shifted his weight. "What do you want from me, Mom?" "To see me." I turned then, fully. "Not the version you've repeated. The one I've let you believe." "What version is that?" "The one where I was fine, always calm, always convenient." His face twisted, something between discomfort and confusion. "You're rewriting history," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm remembering it, loudly." We stood across from each other now, a small table between us. On the far wall, the window reflected both our faces, mine slightly off center, his in full view. His posture was assertive, mine steady. Two versions of the same bloodline staring back in contradiction. "You're not the victim here," he muttered. I took a breath. "I'm not the villain either." He looked toward the door like he might leave, then stopped. "I didn't ask for this trip to turn into a therapy session," he said. "I didn't ask to be treated like luggage." The line hit. I saw it in his shoulders. He shook his head. "You never said any of this before." "I wasn't allowed." "That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "But it's true." Later that afternoon, Grace returned with fresh towels. She moved slower than usual. I offered her tea. She accepted. As we sat on opposite chairs near the fire, she watched me with something softer than curiosity. "You don't remember me, do you?" I blinked. "Should I?" She smiled gently, no offense taken. "It was a while ago. Another hotel, smaller. You checked in late. I remember your wrists." "My wrists?" "You had bruises, faint, not from a fall." I sat straighter, my fingers curled slightly without thinking. "I don't," I began, then stopped. Grace nodded. "I didn't ask questions then. Just made sure your room was quiet. I left a blanket at the foot of your bed." I stared at her. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because sometimes memory needs witnesses. Even if you don't remember, I do. And I saw you." Tears didn't fall, but something inside me shifted, not broken, just named. She patted my hand, then stood. "You were never invisible," she said. "You were just misremembered." And then she was gone. The garden behind the hotel was neat to the point of sterility. Hedges trimmed into cubes, flower beds so precisely planted they looked manufactured. A gravel path wound through manicured rose bushes, their petals just beginning to fall under the weight of late-season air. Harlan was already there when I arrived, leaning against a stone bench, scrolling on his phone with the same blank expression he wore at weddings and funerals, present but unreachable. He didn't look up as I approached. He didn't have to. "You've got everyone buzzing," he said without greeting. "Apparently you're journaling your own revolution in the presidential suite." I didn't sit. "You didn't just teach Asher who to be," I said. "You taught him who not to see." He lowered the phone. "Excuse me?" I kept my voice steady. "You made yourself visible, loud, dominant. You made me the ghost who cleaned up the mess, and he watched it happen." He chuckled. "Is this what this is now? A blame exercise?" "No, it's a recognition," he scoffed. "You're not the first woman to regret being boring. Don't rewrite it like martyrdom." I didn't blink. "You erased me one gentle correction at a time, and I let you." Harlan's jaw flexed. "If you want to feel powerful, Claire, go ahead, but don't drag the past into this performance." I stepped closer, not confrontational, but undeniable. "You trained him to ignore softness, to treat emotional labor like background noise, and now you're watching him become everything you ever were, and you're proud of it." He shook his head. "He's confident." "No," I said. "He's hollow." A pause. The garden quieted around us. "You think you're better than me now?" Harlan asked, voice low. "No," I replied. "I think I'm done being less." His face didn't shift, but something in his posture stiffened, a man unused to losing control of a conversation. "You always did love drama," he muttered, "and you always mistook silence for peace." I turned to leave. His voice followed. "So what now? You walk off and claim some kind of moral high ground?" I didn't stop. "I'm done speaking your language." I didn't look back. Didn't need to. The air felt different past the hedge, lighter. Not because he'd heard me, but because, for once, I didn't need him to. I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember this ending before it became a memory. The suite was quiet in a different way now. Not like a held breath, but like an exhale. The curtains stayed open overnight, and the early light spilled across the room in broad, golden strokes, touching the armchair, the empty teacup on the table, the notebook closed beside it. I packed slowly. Not because there was much to take, just the black slacks, the bold blouse, a few toiletries, but because each fold of fabric felt ceremonial, a preparation not just to leave, but to mark the leaving. I made the bed, even though I didn't need to. wiped down the vanity, fluffed the pillows. The room was cleaner than I found it. It wasn't guilt, it was gratitude. This space had held me while I remembered how to hold myself. At the desk, I ran my hand across the notebook one last time. L. Monroe's entries, my own. The shared silence between our paragraphs. I left it where I found it, in the drawer. Let the next woman stumble into her own recognition, the same way I had. As I zipped my suitcase closed, there was a knock. Reed stood at the door, holding something wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "I know you probably get asked this all the time," he said, "but I wanted to give you something." With a clean first page, I unwrapped it slowly. A notebook, new, linen cover, blank pages. He smiled. "It's your turn to write first." I couldn't speak for a moment, just held it like something living. "I'll try not to let it collect dust," I finally said. He nodded. "I hope you fill every page." We walked to the elevator together, quiet but companionable. As the doors opened, I turned once more toward the suite, room 1302. Not as a guest, but as a woman who had outgrown the need to explain why she stayed and now, finally, why she chose to leave. A week later, back home, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, the handwriting familiar. Asher, no return address, no embellishments, just one paragraph. "Mom, I started therapy. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel yet, but I keep going. I keep talking. I think I finally saw you in that hotel. Not the version I wanted, the one I missed. I'm not saying sorry yet. I don't know if I've earned that, but I see you. Asher." I folded the letter slowly, set it beside the blank notebook, and began. The road stretched narrow and winding, flanked by cliffs on one side and open ocean on the other. The kind of highway that demanded presence, both hands on the wheel, eyes alert to each bend. No radio, no passengers. Just the sound of tires against asphalt and the wind slicing through barely cracked windows. I had never driven this far alone before. But I wasn't afraid. The retreat sat nestled above the bluffs, one of those quiet coastal places with names like Solstice Haven and Harbor Light. I'd bookmarked it years ago, back when I made secret lists of things I'd never do, back when dreaming for myself felt like greed. I checked in with a single bag, no explanation, no guilt. The woman at the front desk smiled like she knew the language of solitude. She handed me a key, not a card, metal, worn, with the number 7 etched in brass. The room was small, but the view was large. Wide windows faced west, where the sea met sky in an unbroken horizon. The walls were painted pale blue, the bed covered in thick, cream blankets. A single chair sat beside a sliding glass door that opened onto a private balcony, just large enough for one. I dropped my bag and walked outside. The wind hit fast and full, pulling my hair across my face, lifting the corners of my open coat. I stood at the edge of the balcony and breathed in the salt, the distance, the promise of something not yet claimed. It didn't feel like arrival. It felt like recovery. The next morning, I took the old notebook down to the beach at sunrise. The pages fluttered in the ocean breeze as I knelt beside a small driftwood fire pit left by a previous guest. I didn't reread them. I didn't need to. I struck the match and lit the first page. The flame caught quickly, traveling line by line, entry by entry, burning L. Monroe's heartbreak and my own. The smoke lifted in curling threads, drifting toward the open sky like a kind of release. No ceremony, no drama, just finality. By the time the last corner curled black, the wind had shifted east. The tide rolled in quietly. I stood, brushing sand from my knees, and walked back up the hill. That afternoon, I sat on the balcony with the new notebook in my lap, its cover still stiff, its pages crisp. The ocean below thundered against rock, powerful but patient. I wrote the final line of the chapter I had been afraid to begin for most of my life. I'm not sleeping in the car anymore. I'm driving it. And for the first time, the road ahead didn't scare me. It waited. The chairs were arranged in a half moon, worn but comfortable. Mismatched cushions, some with coffee stains, all facing the large bay window that let in the coastal morning light. Beyond the glass, waves roared quietly, as if keeping time with the breath of the women sitting inside. The writing retreat had grown. What began as a personal refuge was now something larger, something shared. Claire's idea, supported by grants and the unexpected encouragement of people like Grace and Reed, had taken root. 12 women sat in the room, their eyes met hers not with expectation, but with the vulnerable recognition that only comes from having survived the unspeakable. Reed stood at the edge of the circle. His expression was proud, but not performative, just full. "I'd like to introduce someone," he said, nodding toward Claire. "Not just as a writer, but as someone who turned pain into architecture." There was a long pause, not out of awkwardness, but out of weight. Claire stepped forward, the sun catching the gray in her hair and turning it silver. She smiled gently. "I used to believe family meant staying," she began. Her voice didn't waver. "I thought love was measured by how much you could endure, how much you could lose without complaint." She looked at them, not over them. "I was wrong." A few women nodded slowly. "Family isn't a sentence," she continued. "It's not a punishment you serve, it's a structure you choose. It means deciding who you won't abandon, and starting with yourself." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty, it was sacred. She walked over to the chalkboard and picked up a stick of soft white chalk. "Today's prompt," she said, writing in long, deliberate strokes, "isn't about what happened to you. It's about who you became in the quiet after." She turned back to them. "No edits. No apologies. Just begin." They did. Pens moved, eyes welled, heads bowed over fresh pages. Claire returned to her seat. She opened her own notebook, no longer blank, and began again. Not to remember this time, but to build. This story isn't just mine. It's a quiet revolution in every woman who's ever been overlooked, silenced, or made to feel invisible. If you recognize the weight of unspoken truths or the courage it takes to reclaim your voice, stay close. There's strength in shared stories, and in breaking the silence, we find each other. Keep this conversation alive, for yourself, for those still finding their words.